Hi, I'm Scott Witchalls, Director of Smart Cities at Stantec. We're a global planning and engineering consultancy, and we design the buildings and infrastructure that make up the towns and cities we live in today. I specialise in the transport aspects of community development, and I'm here to talk to you today about whether electric vehicles are the answer to the climate emergency we currently face. So let's start by looking at the mess we've got ourselves into today. Road transport is now the biggest contributor to carbon emissions in the UK, as opposed to things like energy, where huge improvements have been made in reducing the carbon footprint. Transport emissions haven't gone down for over 25 years. Now this is because we've built a society and an environment that is entirely dependent on car access to get around to the places we've designed and built. So in spite of improvements in engine emissions and reduction in CO2 from cars, the traffic growth has continued to rise, so there's been no reduction in carbon impact. Similarly, we're also looking at what people and consumers demand, and the car manufacturers make what we demand, so they've been making bigger and bigger cars that have a bigger carbon footprint. So we know we've got to do something to help stop global warming. Most of the towns and the cities in the UK have started to look at what they can do to help. And what many of them have done now is started to set carbon reduction targets. In fact, in Glasgow and Edinburgh, they've set themselves net zero carbon target by 2030. Now that's one hell of a challenge, and it will mean quite drastic measures might have to be taken. Because transport is the biggest contributor to CO2 in the UK, then surely that has to be one of the key priority areas. So we've got to find ways of tackling the carbon impact of transport as the #1 priority. Many people believe that electric cars are the answer to this huge challenge. It's true, they're much more efficient and there are no CO2 emissions from the exhaust. In fact, the sale of new diesel or petrol cars will be banned after 2035, and that's why car manufacturers are designing and creating a wider range of electric vehicles of all different sizes with much longer ranges between charges. So you can imagine a time where all of the vehicle fleet is electric and it's all charged by renewable energy. If we can get to that stage, then we will have achieved a net zero carbon in terms of vehicle movement around our towns and cities. They're also quieter, so what's not to like? Well, of course, we've got to keep pushing for more and more electric vehicles to replace those of diesel and petrol engine vehicles. But we've also got to be realistic about how long that will take. Because the size and number of vehicles on the existing road network is huge, current projections show that we won't have an all-electric fleet until after 2045. So sometime after our net zero 2030 target. There are some other factors to take into account with electric vehicles as well. The production of the vehicles do have themselves a carbon footprint, and the battery production has other environmental impacts. The other thing is that, of course, there are emissions from brake dust and tyres that are harmful to health. So they're not solving all of our environmental challenges, but they are helping massively to reduce the carbon footprint of travel. And the other factor in electric vehicles is, of course, that they need the infrastructure to charge them up. Current estimates show that Glasgow alone will need 175,000 charging points if it wants to hit its net zero target by 2030. And that will bring with it absolutely huge challenges. Of course, it's relatively easy to install car charging points if you've got a driveway or a garage, but it's much more of a challenge when you look at our towns and cities, much denser built-up areas, high-rise flats, apartments and tenements. And can you imagine some of the beautiful streets of Edinburgh that people come to visit and love, lined with a whole load of electric vehicle charging posts? And that's not to mention the amount of disruption in installing them, digging up the footpaths, and the energy it will take in doing that and the time it will take. Just remember how long it took to build a tram network. We need to come up with a way of providing electric vehicle charging for those people that don't have access to driveways. So we need to look more smartly about where we put these chargers if we don't want to clutter up our streets. And the answer has to be looking at where people park their cars for longest when they're not at home, So clearly places like where you work, where you go shopping, going to the cinema for example, that's where we should be putting in most of the charging infrastructure. And ultimately, when charging times get shorter and shorter, we'll move back towards the petrol filling station model that works so well today, where you'll just turn up, plug in for a few minutes, and your car will be charged up enough to get you to the next destination. We came up with this concept at Stantec a number of years ago and called it the Societal Service Station. So we envisioned a new place where you would charge a car up, but you may go to the gym, you may go for shopping, you may go to pick up some parcels. So it's a sort of place where you can see a clean charging infrastructure that doesn't damage the historic environments of some of our cities. Of course, the other factor in all of this is that environmental harm isn't just about CO2 emissions. Even if we've replaced every vehicle on our networks with an electric vehicle, we'd still have a problem of congestion, and that's set to grow. And along with traffic congestion come other environmental harm, such as community severance, safety issues, visual impact, noise, and they won't go away entirely just by turning every vehicle into an electric vehicle. So we need to do something else as well, and that thing is to use our cars a lot less. If we're really serious about tackling the climate emergency, those people that don't need to use cars should stop using cars. This is all in our hands, and it's about lifestyle, priorities and choice. This graphic from the 70s still holds good today. If all those people in those cars got onto that bus, there'd be a massive reduction in their carbon footprint. And even better, if they could cycle, we'd go straight to zero carbon. Of course, it's not practical to suggest that all of those car trips are not necessary or could be changed. But even if only a small percentage, say 10 or 20%, shifted to either not travelling and working from home, or car sharing occasionally, or using a bus or train, or cycle or walk, that would have a massive impact on our carbon footprint, much bigger than any technology can achieve in the short space of time that it would be possible to achieve that reduction in car trips through people just changing the way they travel. So to summarise, electric vehicles are absolutely part of the answer, and they will deliver massive reductions in CO2 over the medium to long term. But they do bring with them other challenges. We need to install a massive amount of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. That costs time and money and has its own carbon footprint, and we need to plan it much better than we are at the moment. And don't forget that even an electric vehicle still has an environmental impact. There are particulates from the tyres and brakes, and there's a vehicle production carbon footprint to think about. And we can't just rely on technology to solve this for us. It'll take too long, and it's actually in our hands. As you've heard, I believe the biggest single and immediate benefit we could make is to simply stop using our cars as much as we use them today. If we just made a few incremental changes, and every so often we car share or use a train or a bus or walk or bike, then that will have an absolutely huge impact on our carbon footprints. And the added benefit of that is there'll be significantly reduced congestion, and of course the main thing is the wider environmental benefits will be significant. Our streets will feel so much better places, and our towns and cities will feel like the sort of places and the environments we want to live, work and play in well into the future. Well, I hope you found that of some interest, and thank you very much for your time in listening and looking at my slides. Thank you.
Oh la la la, oh la la la, oh la 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 la.